baby crafter. Today I'm going to be making a gnome witch house for my gnome garden. For this project, I started out with a Pringles can. Technically it wasn't a Pringles can, it was a Doritos mini can, but it's the same essential size and shape and everything as a Pringles can. So first I cut my canister in half. Not entirely symmetrical because I did want to have part of the house lower than the rest of the house. So I cut it kind of asymmetrical, basically just based it on how much lower I wanted the second half, because I am going to make a balcony. I took those two pieces and I taped them together, and then I wanted to make the roof part of my witch gnome house, so I took a piece of aluminum foil and I folded it, and as you can see when I did the corners they kind of make little corner triangles, and I put that on the top of my tallest canister and taped that down. I wanted a house that had a witch shaped hat, so that the aluminum foil is my brim of my witch hat, and then I wanted a lower roof that had a balcony. So I have a witch hat roof and a balcony, so that's why the second half of the canister was cut smaller. And then I took my aluminum foil and just put it over the top of the other can of the lower where the balcony was going to be, and I didn't make it a roof or anything, I just made it flat because that just gives me a flat surface to put my clay on for my balcony. And again, just taped everything up to make sure that it was all going to stay in place and not move around too much while I put on the clay. And I used two different kinds of clay. I used Fimo air dry clay and I used SPOOPY air dry clay. I liked the SPOOPY air dry clay a lot better than the Fimo. I know some people swear by Fimo and they say SPOOPY's crap, but I liked the SPOOPY better. I thought it was use the evil word moist. I thought it was wetter than the Fimo, and I thought it cracked less. I just found that the Fimo needed a lot more water and encouragement to stick to itself, and I ended up using too much water on the Fimo, which resulted in some cracking later while it dried. Whereas my SPOOPY that I used, I didn't have to use any water to get it to, it was stickier, wetter, and I didn't have to use any water when putting it together. It stuck to itself very well, and it didn't crack at all. Plus I just like the smell of the SPOOPY better. I don't know, something, I didn't like the musty smell of the Fimo. So basically I have an acrylic sheet that I use for rolling out my clay because otherwise it sticks to my latex mat, and just went through rolling the pieces into about 1/2 inch thick pieces and just started slapping them on the cardboard of the Doritos canister. I was worried that maybe it wouldn't stick to the cardboard, but no, it stuck pretty well. Didn't really have any issues. Like I said, I had to use a lot of water to continuously dampen the Fimo to get it to stick to itself. Didn't need any help sticking to the cardboard, it just didn't want to stick to itself, and to smooth out the lines. But I did end up using too much water, because if you use too much water on air dry clay as you're working with it, it will actually cause the clay to crack. I basically worked my way around the canister, forming and shaping. At this point it kind of looked like I was making a boot with a hat on it. The hardest part was just doing the hat to keep the brim from sinking because it wanted to kind of collapse, and from keeping the conical shape of the witch's hat from collapsing in on itself. I should have wrapped more layers with the cone to keep it from collapsing, but I didn't. Lesson learned. I got to work on the balcony. I basically took little pieces of wire and stuck them in at intervals along the floor of the balcony, and then I used clay to roll and stabbed into the wires, so then I had my railings. By this point I was out of the Fimo because I pretty much used all of it on the house part, but it worked out that I ran out of Fimo because the SPOOPY worked a lot better for this part, because I'm sure if I'd used Fimo for the columns it would have cracked, they would have broken, it would have been a big mess. Went through making my little columns, then I rolled out some flat strips of clay to make my balcony railings. I noticed that as I went along, instead of using water to get the clay to stick together, I used watered down white Elmer's glue, and not only did that work better and it didn't crack when it was done, it actually made the clay not only not crack but be stronger. It held up better, so I'll probably do that again. And I didn't use much water to water down my glue, just kind of thinned it out to where it was more like it was still thick, like a Mod Podge consistency, but just a little thinned out. So like maybe 1 part water to 2 parts glue is what I would probably do. Or you could maybe half part water to 2 parts glue. Just depends on how thin you want it, but I found that the thicker it was, the better it worked. I made a little door for my balcony and a little step or stoop, and then just kind of used a sharp pointy thing to make my wood patterns in there. And I made my windows, and again just used a sharp thing to give them texture. I made a little door with rocks around it, and originally I just stuck them on there, and then the next day after it dried they fell off, so I had to stick them on. I used Elmer's glue to stick them back on, to glue them on, and that worked great. Elmer's glue is the glue you want to use when you're fixing or attaching things to dried air dry clay. I looked it up, googled lots of things to find out what the best glue was to use with air dry clay. Everybody pretty much said Elmer's glue or white tacky glue. I made a little cat out of some leftover air dry clay I had because I wanted a little black cat for my witch's house. And so I made that out of air dry clay. I just used white so that I could paint it whatever color, and I ended up painting it green. Then I made a little witch's broom, and again I just used some of my clay texturing tools to make the little striations in it to give it texture, to make it look like an actual broom. Here you can see me pulling off the rocks and gluing back on the glue because they popped off. This is the part where it had dried and I had cracks everywhere. So I had the idea of, I'll take some of my SPOOPY and I'll put that over the cracks, because I tried to look up fixing cracks in air dry clay, and it was basically like, if you've ever tried to read a scientific journal and one person says this, and then there's 50,000 comments about people disagreeing what he said and saying, well, no, this is actually the best way. No, this is the best way. That's what you'll get if you search how to fix air dry clay cracks. Everybody's got their own theory on what works best. The people that give you a recipe for what to use, it's really confusing, hard to follow, and a big mess, and I just didn't want to have to do it. So I was like, you know what, I'll just try air dry clay and see how that works. It actually worked pretty good. It did have a texture where I had to fix it, but then that ended up working out because I decided to paint those areas where I'd repaired it green, so then it looked like there was ivy growing on the house, which actually ended up being better. So happy accident. It wasn't what I'd originally intended, but it worked out because it looked pretty good on the house with the ivy, because then I got my clay mold I have for leaves, and I just took some air dry clay, slapped those in there, and then made leaves and put that on there, and it ended up looking really nice. Funny story about the little chimney I have on there. My daughter had actually made that for another gnome house we were making, but got bored, left it, didn't finish it. But the little chimney was so neat looking, the way she'd made it all curvy and stuff, that I decided to repurpose it for my witch house. So her chimney got a second life as a chimney for the gnome witch house. And here you'll see me, I'm painting everything black. I decided on a dark green for the leaves, ivy, black of course for the witch's hat, and purple for the actual house, just because I thought it was pretty. And then of course, you know, kind of a stone gray for all the accents, just because I don't want them to be black, but I didn't want them to contrast with the purple, so I just made them gray, and then I did a black paint wash over the gray to kind of give it a stone look, which turned out really well. I already did separate shorts of the gnome that I actually made for this, so if you want to see how I made her, you can watch my little short. I did make a little pumpkin tower for the witch's house, and I've got another short for that, so you can watch how I made that. As far as her cauldron, I did not film it, unfortunately, but basically I found a picture of a cauldron that I liked, and then I just made a blob of clay, basically a sphere, and then used one of my clay tools to dig out the center, and then kind of just shaped the inside with my fingers till it had a round, you know, until it was kind of hollow inside but kind of still round on the outside. Then I took a strip of clay that I had rolled so it was cylindrical like a little snake, and put that around the edge of the cauldron to make the lip, and then I cooked it because it was polymer clay, and then I put green fake pearls inside to make it look like witch's bubbling brew, and then I took some more clay and made a little fire, and I made black rocks for the fire, and the flames I just cut out little triangles and things and put those together, and then that was my cauldron. Oh, and then I used a piece of wire and I just curved it into a handle shape. painted my little cat black and used a clay dotting tool to push indents for his eyes so I could paint those separately. The whole process was really fun. I loved seeing it all come together, starting out as a mini Dorito canister and then turning into a little witch's house with a balcony and a hat and leaves and ivy. It just came out so cute. And let me tell you, this part of making the individual leaves and putting them on, it was a little more than I realized it would be. It took forever. I had to make them all individually, and then I placed them all on. And the next day, after I tried, they had all fallen off. So I had to take Elmer's glue and glue them on individually. Painting them, luckily, was easier because all I had to do was paint them green. They all had texture on them, which you can't really see from the camera, from the video, but they did have texture, which was cool. And I took a light green paint wash, to paint over to kind of emphasize that texture. Next time I get the bright idea to put ivy on a house, I'm gonna make sure not to use individual leaves. I made a little doormat for my witch's house too. I meant to make it say beware, but I accidentally out of habit wrote welcome, so my witch is very welcoming. I don't know if you can see it very well in the video, but I did. She does have a crystal ball. I took a bead and painted it black, and then I have a resin mold that'll make globes, like little circles, marbles. And so I made one of those with some of my pigment that I have. It's a glow-in-the-dark pigment. It was kind of a greenish color, and I put that in, made the resin, cured it of course, and then I took the little ball and glued it to the bead so it looked like it was on a stand, and then glued that to the balcony in front of the witch so at night it'll glow in the dark. Really kind of neat. For my leaves, I did make roses. I called it ivy, but I guess it's technically rose bushes because I made roses to stick on my leaves and I painted them red. Now, to make the roses is really simple. You just take a little bit of clay, smoosh it into a circular flat circle shape on your finger, and then curl it so it makes like a tube. And then just keep doing that and putting the petals or your flat circles around, build them up around your tube, and just keep adding and adding and adding until you get the size rose you want. And then you'll have a big long tube, and then I just cut it in half. Voila, you got 2 roses. Super simple to make, turns out really pretty. Usually after I've cut it in half to have the 2 roses, I'll kind of work the petals to where it spreads out a little more and is less flattened so it looks more like an opened rose. Really easy to do, really fun because the effect, you could even probably do it on a bigger scale where you took smooshed bigger pieces. Usually what I started is I roll a piece of clay into a ball about the size petal that I want, and then I just smoosh it flat with my fingers, and then there, voila, there's my petal. You could even do it on a bigger scale and make a bigger rose. I would just make sure to make your petals not too thick, probably maybe about a ½ inch thick, because if the thicker you make it, the harder it is going to be to dry and the more likely it is to crack. One thing I did learn, because this was my first time working with air-dried clay on this big of a scale, is air-dried clay is great for covering large areas and for not really detail, but just making things, shapes and things. If you want something that is more detailed, that'll hold detail, polymer clay is better because it's a little harder and it takes the details better. Of course, you do have to bake it, whereas in this situation, since I had cardboard under the clay, I wasn't sure if I could bake that. I didn't want to end up catching the inside of my witch house on fire, so I didn't cook the cardboard. So that's why I went with air-dried clay for this, but that is what I learned. Air-dried clay is good for big surface areas, not so good for detailed work. So the witch gnome and the voodoo tower, pumpkin tower, were made out of polymer clay, and most of the house was made out of air-dry clay. I had a lot of fun making it. I had a lot of fun watching as it formed, because I was kind of not sure if I'd be able to, if it would come out right, if it would look good. It came out better than I expected. I loved the effect of the rose bushes with their red roses and the little balcony with the witch gazing at her crystal ball and my little black cat perching on the roof, and, you know, of course the cauldron sitting on her in front of her house just waiting for her to make something or cast some spell. For her door, I made a little bat door knocker. I made this out of air-dry clay because, again, I couldn't really bake the witch house. Used a little bit of glue, glued the wings on. The bat was basically a ball with wings that I cut attached to him. He had little ears that I made out of triangles, and then I made little tiny triangles out of white clay to make him some little teeth. And then I took a jump ring from a jewelry set that I had, made a little indent, and stuck that in. So he actually has a metal little knocker. Now I did make a base for the house because it's hollow in the inside. I didn't put any clay on the bottom. So I took some plexiglass, like one of these models I get where they give you a case, which I never use. I painted it gray, and then I used Poscas to make a cobblestone design, and then used Posca to paint that in and fill that in with black, so it had a kind of cobblestone-y thing. And then I took E6000 and I just glued the bottom of the clay, splatted it on top of the base, and then I glued the little pieces like the cauldron and the voodoo tower and all that, so that they wouldn't get knocked over by the cats, because that's their favorite thing to do, is to run full force through my gnome garden and knock stuff over. And then instead of putting it in the main area of the gnome garden, I put it in the rocks next to the gnome garden so that it was among the leaves and it was all hidden, like you had to go into the woods to get to the witch. It looked really cool. I did the same as far as giving a base to the voodoo tower, that way it wouldn't shift at all. Got my gray base, painted with just gray acrylic paint. It sticks to the plastic plexiglass really well. Just free-handed my cobblestone pattern to make rocks, shapes of different sizes and patterns and everything, and just colored it all in. I used Gorilla Glue, super glue, glued it all together and stuck it in the gnome garden. In this shot, you could kind of see the witch's gazing ball. Not a great view. I don't know why I didn't film myself making that. Gotta keep you guys on your toes. Wouldn't want to film everything. I think so far, my gnome witch house is my favorite thing that I've made. It turned out better than I expected. Things that almost made it ruin, that I thought were the end of the world, actually turned out to be better, such as the cracks, where I ended up having to do ivy. Sealed the whole thing with Helene's gloss acrylic sealer, and then gave it its place in the gnome garden. I hope you enjoyed watching me make my gnome witch house, and like and subscribe for more videos of this type. I experiment with all kinds of different mediums, and I enjoyed every minute of it. Have a great day, and hope to see you again. Thanks. Bye.